Hello and welcome to Your Business, Your Wealth. I want to welcome me today because I am the only host. So let me get a round of applause for your host, Paul Adams. Oh, guys, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So glad that I could be here. I want to welcome all of you guys to Your Business, Your Wealth. That's right. We have a new soundboard, fun, exciting things to talk about today. And as you guessed it, I am the only host today. Corey's not feeling well. Jeff is scuba diving in some unique area on the face of this planet. So you guys got me. My name is Paul Adams. I'm the host of Your Business, Your Wealth. Also happen to be CEO and founder of Sound Financial Group. But we are going to have some fun today. I found a really unique article from the Wall Street Journal walking us through 5 families, well, technically 5 retirees, and I'm going to tell you how they're a little wonky with their counting here when we're done. But what I thought was unique about this article is it tells us a glimpse into what somebody's life is like when they're retiring on less than $1 million of assets. And they're in different parts of the country with different situations. And we're going to talk about there's inside some of their profiles that Wall Street Journal has written are some of the past mistakes that they made that you could easily avoid. And so we're going to point those out. And second, and I can't encourage this enough, is for you guys to go and read this article. If you have a subscription to the Wall Street Journal or has a friend that has one, it is well worth reading, if for no other reason than to know that you want to reach retirement with much more than $1 million of assets, because each of these people talk about compromises that they've had to make so far in their financial life simply because of a restricted amount of cash flow that these assets can produce for them. Some of them took tremendous risks in order to have it produce enough cash flow that worked out. We're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about those mistakes they made leading up to it. Not in any way for if any of these folks got a hold of this and felt bad, but rather so that the errors that have been talked about in this article can be avoided by all of you, which is our primary purpose. Now, as a little reminder, like this video, comment below anything you would like. It makes a difference in that YouTube algorithm. For many of you know, most of the people listen to the podcast on their favorite podcasting platform. We do the YouTube to give you guys a little more entertainment, getting a chance to engage with you a little more, and we look forward to all of those comments. I read all of them. With that, let's get to the article today. We are going to look here at here's what retirement with less than 1 million looks like in America. Now, here's a little funny way they counted it. There's actually only 4 profiles of households, but one is a married couple, and then one is a couple that lives together but only profiles the wife. So we only actually have 4 financial circumstances to look at, and we're going to tackle them kind of one at a time here. So let's hit our first couple. Now, our first couple, they have retired with a total of, I'm just scrolling up, savings and investments. You can see here, $411,000, annual spending, $50,000. Now it goes deeper into the unfortunate health challenges they had that prevented them from being able to move, etc. But right down here is the thing that got my attention more than anything else, which kind of leads to the situation that they're in now. So Mr. Jones' retirement account took a hit in 2008 and never recovered. Now pause there for a moment. Now, for those of you listening to the show on a regular basis, like, wait, 2008, have you seen the returns in the stock market since 2008? They've been almost up and to the right other than a few blips along the way. But if you look at the growth in an academically allocated, globally diversified portfolio from 2008 to today, the growth is tremendous. But right there, it says it never recovered. So why? Spooked by the S&P 500's 38.49% decline in 2008. Now, pause there. It doesn't say he owned the S&P 500. It just says he was spooked by that. He sold his stocks and invested in a stable value fund that earned about 1% a year, said the couple's son-in-law, John Older, a doctor who has managed the portfolio since 2018 And Dr. Older moved 35% of the balance into a low-cost index fund and the rest in intermediate treasury bond index fund. So they're now 35% stocks. And since 2018, that's probably been a very good thing for them because they would be even lower if they didn't do that. But what happened was somebody encountered a market they weren't prepared for. Maybe their advisor didn't prepare them for, or maybe they didn't have an advisor. Maybe what they were sold was nothing but beautiful up and to the right success. And what they got was something different. What they got was the market went down. They got scared. They went to something, the stable value earning 1%, probably some sort of cash or money market account, and never ever recovered where they were. Now, some of you listening could be one of those people. Maybe you're browsing the internet right now and you found this, but you've had your money in cash maybe since COVID. And this is a tale that you can learn from because that hit that it took in 2008, their money would have grown at least 2x since the last time they had it in, with even a monicum of a diversified portfolio, relatively low cost, that's not an active manager trying to trade ahead of the market. And yet these folks are trapped in somewhat of a lower investment position than they would ideally be, primarily because of the 2008 downturn. And maybe, like we saw many people, I've been in this industry since about 98, and I watched people they were scared of the market because of the tech bubble. Then they kind of got back into the market maybe 2006 and then got their head handed to them in 2008 and abandoned the market again. And not too uncommon, here they got in, finally got courage again, maybe with some help of their son, to be able to start inkling back into the market. And now we've got our current level of volatility, and that can scare somebody to even get out of that 35% portfolio. But hopefully their son, that's the physician that's managing the portfolio, keeps them disciplined. So the first thing we learned is that when you encounter volatile markets, don't abandon strategy with your portfolio. Now, if you've got a portfolio that has been invested and you're unsure about it, it makes sense to assess the portfolio. Perhaps you're not allocated properly, but to abandon it and go completely out of the market is probably one of the most ill-advised things, because while they look at their balance and they say, oh, we haven't lost any money, what they don't see is the tremendous amount of money that they lost because they weren't in the market when it recovered. And that is the bigger loss most people have with their money, far bigger than the downturn that they sold out of, right? Like, so if he lost 38% that year, well, he lost over 100% by just not being invested for the following decade. So that's lesson number one we can take from these families. Okay, now let's jump back to it. We're going to go to our next couple. Now, our next couple is the single person in the household that has two people. So Janet Gottlieb Salian, savings and investments about $250,000, annual spending $38,000. Now you can see that spending can be supported halfway decent simply because of Social Security. But as we scroll down here, this is what I wanted to make note of. Since retiring in 2019, the dual citizen of US and Canada has navigated the pandemic and inflation. The stock market downturn wiped away 20% of her nest egg, which is now worth $240,000. So for any of you that were invested during COVID, you watched the market take a huge drop, bottoming out approximately March 23rd of 2020 and fully recovering by year end. So how did she lock in those losses? We are learning the first lesson for a second time, in that in some way she must have abandoned her strategy because she never earned back the 20% that she lost. Now, the other ways that this could have happened, and we're going to make this both the first lesson and the second lesson, is she could have had highly concentrated individual stock positions. And when that goes down, it's not like saying I've got a small cap stock and small caps are down right now, so I'll just keep holding the small cap stock, because you still have the individual financial risk of failure of that single company, rather than having a diversified position so we benefit when small cap goes up as a part of our allocation. So she may have abandoned a disciplined strategy, or maybe she abandoned some stocks that were picked in her portfolio. But it leads us to think again, when we're in our portfolio, we should be putting ourselves through our own fire drill. Like, what if the market goes down 20% this year? What am I going to do? Well, what we ought to be doing is rebalancing. That should be automatic. And we should be adding more money if we have it to our portfolio of investments when they're down. Because if you just think to yourself, when the market goes down next, I'm going to try and add money, that automatically takes you out of that gear shift that most of society is in, that has them jumping their money around from place to place. And if you wonder why we do that, well, it's because, now I'm not blaming the Wall Street Journal for this. The Wall Street Journal is just kind of saying what their situation is and isn't telling us about the errors. But now look at your financial media. Anything you'd watch on the news, Jim Cramer, anything you'd hear on the radio, so much of it is about sparking fear in financial markets such that you would keep your money moving. That's what attracts the advertisers to those same TV shows. They want to advertise on those shows because they know they're going to scare the daylights out of you and make you want to put your money in motion. And then they want that first seat to be able to present to you their idea in that commercial and hopefully get you moving your money to a new institution, hopefully theirs. So we got to keep that in mind anytime we're reading the financial media, that they have an interest in keeping our eyes glued, and they do not have any incentive to make sure that we're well educated about our money. Their only incentive is that they get our eyes either for the readership or for the ratings if it's a TV show, so that they can give the most money to their advertiser or get the most money from their advertisers in order to present to you. All right, let's get on to our next one. Our next family is Mr. Modell, single guy, Jordan Modell, saving and investments of $158,000 plus about $600,000 in rental properties. Annual spending $80,000. Now, this gentleman retired about 7 years ago. We're going to just focus on this part of the article here. Mr. Modell is using his retirement to pursue his long-held dream of being a landlord to low-income tenants. I'm going to pause there for a second. I just want to say I've never heard anybody having that as their lifelong dream. So good for him. Somebody should do that. Providing housing for people that are on Section 8 is a valuable service to our society. Somebody needs to do it. I'm glad it was his dream. Then about 7 years ago, a year after he retired, he withdrew about $600,000 from his portfolio and bought 5 houses in lower income areas of New Jersey. The Section 8 rentals generate about $80,000 a year after taxes and income. So let's look at what he was able to do. When he retired, and I think it said he was a data analyst or something to that effect, that when he retired, he took $600,000 of about an $800,000 portfolio, it looks like, and bought a bunch of properties in New Jersey. Now, the first thing that jumps out at me, by the way, is what happened. Because 7 years ago, real estate that he bought should be worth a lot more than what he bought it for. So one question I have just in the article that is unanswered for me as the reader is, how is the $600,000 of real estate he bought still just $600,000? That's question one. The second observation, this is the third lesson here today, is that he pulled a Hail Mary. You see, this guy had not enough money to produce the $80,000 a year he needed. So he took a Hail Mary, took $600,000, bought these properties. Now, I don't know if they had mortgages on them. I would assume they did. But he bought the 5 properties, and now they're producing cash flow, $600,000 purchase, $80,000 cash flow. You can do the quick math in your head. That is much more than a 10% cap rate on those properties, meaning he is getting a level of cash flow that is inordinately high for rental real estate. Now, you find out one of the reasons why. If you've ever read Robert Greene's Long Distance Real Estate Investing, if you wanted to look it up, it was published in about 2017. We could probably put a link to it in our show notes. And that book talks about the fact that you can get that kind of cash flow on rental properties, but I'm using his words, you have to buy properties that are in a war zone, meaning they're going to be lower income tenants, they're going to be high crime areas, more potential likely damage to the properties, etc. So buying a real estate cash flow that cash flows that high is not a passive investment. And it says so much as you further read the article, is that he's talking to tenants and tenants having to negotiate like, hey, can I pay this part in 2 weeks instead of paying it now? So he kind of has a part-time job that he's having to do to manage these properties because he's doing it, number one. Number two, there are properties that are typically harder to manage. But the big lesson is here, he took a Hail Mary that could have just as easily gone the wrong way. For instance, there's nothing in this about he had experience being a rental property landlord. So he could have made some tremendous errors in the early stage that would have never had him be able to bail out and maybe cost him the properties. Now, kudos for him. He threw the Hail Mary, it landed in the end zone, at least to current date, and he's able to take this much larger amount of cash flow. But for those of you that have been listening very long, you know what our advice would be in this situation, which is he still shouldn't be spending more than about 4% cash flow off those properties because he doesn't know what might go wrong with them. You know, do we go through a period of time where there's a budget crisis and then those Section 8 payments aren't being made for 2 months? Can he weather that? Is there a situation where they significantly change the allocation of this housing and it no longer qualifies for Section 8? Now he has these really terrible rental properties and he's trying to get somebody to rent them. And you get my sense that there is just not enough margin in this person's life to be owning 5 properties, potentially having the obligation to repair them and continue to live his retirement. So my hope is for him, he's using some of that additional cash flow along with Social Security that comes in and being able to create a reserve fund so he doesn't get himself in trouble. Hail Marys can work, but what would have been a much better situation for him is to have $2-3 million when he retired and then maybe take a piece of that and achieve his lifetime dream of being this landlord to low-income tenants. That it worked out, but you can get a sense of the needle he had to thread for it to work that well. And then, of course, we have the outstanding question of like, why isn't that real estate worth at least double what it was 7 years ago? And it may have to do with it being in a, as Robert Greene would call, war zone. All right, let's get to our next one. Now, this is our last one, and this guy's my favorite, okay? This is Chris Ravenna. Savings and investments, $80,000. Annual spending, $20,000. Now, this gentleman was a machining, I'm going to get it wrong, most of career, tool and die maker. So that's like, working on the big CNC machines and designing tools and dies that go in much, much bigger machines. And it's a trade that I know people in, and it is a talent. There's no question. But what I loved is you get down here further, he earned about $50,000 a year. Pause there. Now, of the other folks, they all had jobs that, at least as you read the article, you'll see each of them had jobs that should have had a much higher income earning capacity. This guy had his $50,000 a year job, and he managed to save 20% of it. I'm going to say that again. He had a $50,000 a year job, and he saved 20% of it, $10,000 a year. He did this largely, as you guys have heard us say on the show over and over again, he did that by keeping his expenses low. Obviously, he sure as heck didn't do it by increasing his income. He wears his clothes for decades and rarely purchases new ones, though he treated himself to some new socks last July. Now that's somebody who has cultivated contentment, put themselves in the position where a new set of socks is the treat. Now, the reason I point him out is I want to point out the disciplined savings rate, the lower income than everybody else in the study. He's a single income household where some are dual income households in this, not study, but in this article. And he has accumulated more than all of them when multiplied by the kind of income he made. Let me explain. Let's say you're listening to this right now and you make $300,000 a year. Let's say you at $300,000 of income a year are as successful at saving for retirement as this person. Well, then that would put you having approximately $4.8 million. I'm going to say that again. If you're making $300,000 a year, for you to retire as good as this guy who was a tool and die maker, you would need to have $4.8 million by retirement on your $300,000 income. So he has done a tremendous job of building capital, and he did it largely by accumulating in his 401k. By the looks of the amount of money he has, he probably just owned a diversified portfolio and didn't do anything but rebalance the entire time. The reason I say he probably was a disciplined investor is had he been anything less than a disciplined investor, it would have only taken one mistake. One mistake in 2008, selling out low and staying out of the market for, say, 24 months, that would have prevented his money being $800,000 by now. So the person that in this article most highlights what we all might want to do is the one with the least amount of excitement and fanfare and is sort of the most boring guy in the entire article. And yet, that's the one that's most successful, at least as it's related to the amount of expenses he has and the amount of earnings he had in his lifetime to the amount of capital assets he now has to ensure his independence for the rest of his life. Now, one thing he brings up in the interview is that one thing he's worried about is what happens when I'm older. He's single. He's seen his mom deal with health issues and knows how difficult it can be being alone and needing help. So he's hoping for community. But if this podcast ever gets back to him, I would just encourage him, given that he's got some surplus, go get a long-term care insurance policy. Make sure that your community around you doesn't have to take care of you. Because he mentions, well, I guess what I'll have to do is build a big enough community around me and relationships that I'll be okay in my old age. But I want that community to be able to visit me. I want that community to be able to encourage me, to give me ideas of how I can spend my time. I don't want them having to help me transfer from my bed to my chair. You see, that's what gets taken care of by something like long-term care insurance. So, what are the lessons we learned in this episode? 1, don't abandon your investment strategy. Work with your advisor to put you through some fire drills to make sure that you're going to be okay. Second, it probably makes sense to make sure that you revisit your overall allocation with your money. Because as we saw in our second, for instance, she had the market go down but didn't stay in, and it may have been because she was in something like individual stocks rather than an academically allocated, globally diversified portfolio. Third, we learned, and I'm going to pull it back up for all of you. Third, we learned that, that you can throw a Hail Mary and it might work. You might be able to go out and make some big investment move and buy some high cash flowing assets. And it worked for this guy. The Hail Mary made the touchdown, but it sure looks like, given the amount of net worth and the kind of career he had, there were some steps missed along the way that would have made it maybe a lot easier and less stressful for him had he not had to throw the Hail Mary. And then last but not least, what we learned from our final gentleman in the article is that just saving a high percentage of your income and staying invested for decades and decades and decades works out as some of the best outcomes that you could have. Now, the only reason he's in an article successfully retired on people with less than $1 million is this gentleman learned to be satisfied with very little. He has cultivated contentment in his life. And the other couples, we don't know, but we know that they reached their old age with far less. I don't think if you asked one of these couples, maybe except our guy who is the machinist, everybody else, I think if you asked them when they were in their 40s, what would you like your retirement to look like? Not one of them would picture the retirement they're telling us about now in this article. And that's what I want all of you to maybe leave this episode with that would be the most important. That is, what is it you actually want your old age and financial independence to look like? And then based upon how you want that to look, do some accurate thinking. Are the things you're doing going to get you anywhere near that? And if you don't know how to make that assessment, then feel free to reach out to us. You can email us at info@SFG, like Sound Financial Group, WA, like just the two letters, W&A.com. And you're going to be able to maybe get connected with one of our advisors who can help you make an assessment about whether or not the future that you hope to have are the actions you're in on pace to do it. Now I'm going to close with this. Just last week, we released the video of my CrossFit competition. In that video, we talk about the fact that you, much like me getting ready for that competition, it took daily effort. It took a community. It took a consequential environment. It took a coach. And that was for me to survive from about 6 a.m. till noon that day through 4 workouts. That's pretty easy by comparison to 20, 30 years of old age until we pass away. And it's going to take more than somebody going at age 55. Hey, I'm a little bit behind and I really need to save. There won't be enough time then. So if you're in mid-40s now and you know you've got a way that you want your financial future to look, I would much rather you be proactive, that you get the financial independence that you want, and that you never have an article like this written about what's left of your career, what's left of the net worth that you built, what's left of your legacy is getting chewed up by purely existing in your old age. That's what I want for all of you, is to be able to get ahead of that. And of course, one thing we'll add, I'm going to ask Miranda to put it on the landing page. So if you click on the show notes and you go to our landing page, there's going to be a link to a calculator. It's a calculator. It's on our website. It's free for you to use. We pay to license it, so you get a really good detailed calculator. And you could do some quick checking of your assumptions of whether or not you're okay before you reach out to any advisor. And what I hope for all of you is that if you get a chance to listen to this and it's resonating with you, it's got your attention, have your spouse listen to it. Have your closest friends listen to it, because you don't want to get to your old age and you've got your financial picture totally handled, and to find out your friends can't retire and they can't spend the rest of retirement and the rest of your lives being able to spend time and hang out together because they still have to pay the bills, or they can't pay the bills and they've had to retire on a really low income and all their options are shut off. So they can't take the vacations with you want to take. They can't have the experiences you want to have. And these might be the people you've known for 20 or 30 years. So be sure to share this episode. Be sure to talk with your spouse about this. Have them listen, and then have a conversation about whether or not what you're doing right now is going to land you on track with the future that you picture, or maybe like some of these families, the future that you end up left with after the culmination of a bunch of decisions that might have been made by default rather than by design decades in advance. So with that, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I hope you enjoyed me being by myself. We're going to bring the guys back and make sure they're here next week. But in the meanwhile, we hope that this episode has been a contribution to you being able to design and build a good life.